"I'll give you my last piece of bread if you'll be my dad," said an abandoned little girl, but a millionaire saw her and did something shocking. Watch until the end. Comment telling me what you thought of this story by giving it a rating from 0 to 10. I really want to know if you liked my story and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The March rain fell heavily on the hilly streets of Aspen Falls, Washington, when Lily Taylor, just 4 years old, sheltered under the tattered awning of an abandoned bakery. Her clothes were soaked and clung to her small frame, while her bare feet trembled against the cold asphalt. For 8 months, she had watched the same man every morning, a gray-haired gentleman who walked the streets carrying bags of food to distribute to those in need. Ethan Montgomery adjusted his coat against the chilly wind and checked the contents of his bags one more time. At 52, he had turned these morning walks into his only reason to leave the house since he lost everything 2 years ago. The weight of the faded photo in his shirt pocket and the silver cross necklace that had belonged to his late wife, Miranda, were always with him, constant reminders of a life that had shattered on a rainy night, just like this one. The little girl watched him with childlike curiosity, noticing how he always seemed to carry a deep sadness in his eyes. Even when he smiled at the people who received his donations, Lily had learned to read people's expressions during her months living on the streets. It was a matter of survival to distinguish who might be dangerous from who might help. Ethan stopped in front of a makeshift shelter where 3 families were protecting themselves from the storm. He distributed bread, fruit, and a few cartons of milk, speaking gently with each person. Lily noticed that he always lingered longer when talking to the children, crouching down to be at their eye level and speaking in an especially soft voice. When he finished his distributions for the day, Lily made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She emerged from her hiding place, firmly holding the last piece of bread she had managed to get the day before. It was all she had to eat, but something inside her pushed her to act. "Sir," she called out, her small voice almost lost in the sound of the rain. Ethan turned and saw the wet, frail girl approaching him. Something in her large, determined eyes made him stop completely. There was something familiar in that gaze, a mix of courage and vulnerability that instantly transported him to memories he preferred to keep locked away. "I have this," Lily said, holding out the piece of bread. "If I give it to you, can you be my daddy for just one day?" The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He slowly knelt, bringing himself to the girl's level, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt real tears well up in his eyes. The innocence of her proposal, the generosity of a child offering her only meal, touched something deep in his heart, which had been hardened by grief. "What's your name, little one?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Lily. And you?" "Ethan. And I accept your offer. But you're going to keep that bread. Daddies take care of their daughters, not the other way around." In that moment, under the cold Aspen Falls rain, 2 lost souls found each other. Ethan saw in Lily's delicate features a disturbing resemblance to his daughter Claire, who would have been the same age if she were still alive. The way she tilted her head when she spoke, the determined way she held the bread, everything reminded him of painful memories he had tried to bury. Ethan took Lily to a nearby diner, where she voraciously ate everything he ordered. Between bites, she recounted fragments of her story, how she had woken up one day alone in the county hospital, how no one had come to pick her up, how she had learned to survive on the streets by watching other homeless people. "My mom worked as a housekeeper, but she disappeared," Lily said, wiping her face with the sleeve of her t-shirt. "The man at the hospital said nobody was coming for me anyway." Ethan felt anger rise in his chest. How could a child so young be simply abandoned? His own wounds were still raw, but the injustice of Lily's situation awakened a protective instinct he thought he had lost along with his family. During the rest of that afternoon, Ethan discovered more details about Lily's life. She knew her father's name was Daniel and that he worked at a textile factory, but she didn't understand why he had vanished from her life. She spoke of her mother, Zoe, with affection, remembering lullabies and the smell of laundry detergent that always lingered on her hands. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan made a decision that surprised even himself. He couldn't just let this child go back to the streets. There was something in Lily's purity that had sparked a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in 2 years. "Lily, how about we sleep in a warm bed tonight? Tomorrow, we'll find out where your mother is." The girl's eyes lit up with a hope that Ethan recognized as dangerous. It was the same hope he had lost on the night he received the fatal call about the accident. But this time, he was determined not to disappoint. As they walked through the streets of Aspen Falls toward Ethan's house, neither of them imagined that this impulsive decision would trigger a series of discoveries that would shake not only their lives, but an entire community. The past was about to reveal itself in unimaginable ways, and secrets buried for years would begin to emerge like ghosts on a stormy night. The first clue that nothing would be simple came when Ethan asked for more details about Lily's father, Daniel Rivera. The name echoed in his mind like a distant alarm. Where had he heard that name before? The answer was closer than he imagined, connecting their personal tragedies in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend. The next morning brought a discovery that would change everything. Ethan had spent the night searching his company's archives, trying to find any reference to the name Daniel Rivera. When he finally found the record, his blood ran cold. Daniel not only worked at the Northwood textile mill, but he had been hired right around the time Ethan had made a large investment in the company. Lily woke up in the guest room of Ethan's house, confused and frightened. It was the first time in 8 months she had slept in a real bed, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. The smell of coffee and fresh toast coming from the kitchen reassured her, vaguely reminding her of happy mornings with her mother. "Good morning, little one," Ethan said when she appeared in the kitchen, still wearing the same clothes from the day before. "How about we take a bath and find some clean clothes for you?" During the bath, Ethan was shocked to discover small scars scattered across Lily's body, marks that suggested neglect or something worse. The anger he had felt the previous day intensified, but he forced himself to keep his voice calm when he asked about them. "They're from when I used to fall a lot on the street," Lily explained simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. After putting on clean clothes that Ethan had bought at a nearby store, they headed to the Northwood textile mill. Ethan's plan was simple: find Daniel and find out why he had abandoned his daughter. But reality proved to be much more complex. The factory supervisor, a short, nervous man named Gerald, received them reluctantly. "Daniel Rivera?" "Yes, he works here. But Ms. Valerie doesn't like personal visits during work hours." "Valerie?" Ethan asked, the name sounding strangely familiar. "Valerie Campos. She took over management of the factory about 3 years ago, very strict with the rules." When Valerie appeared, Ethan felt as if he had seen a ghost. The 45-year-old woman, approaching them with firm steps and a stern expression, was almost a younger copy of his late wife Miranda. The same green eyes, the same determined chin, even the way she walked was similar. "How can I help you?" Valerie asked, her voice cold and professional. "We're looking for Daniel Rivera. It's about his daughter," Ethan explained, watching her reaction closely. Valerie's face hardened. "Daniel doesn't have a daughter, at least not that I know of, and even if he did, personal problems are not discussed here." Lily, who had remained quiet behind Ethan, took a step forward. "Yes, he's my daddy. He always brought me candy when he visited Mommy." Valerie's expression changed subtly. For a fraction of a second, Ethan saw something that looked like recognition in her eyes, quickly followed by something that looked like fear. "Gerald, call Daniel here. Now," she ordered. When Daniel Rivera appeared, Ethan was surprised. He was a young-looking man, maybe 35, but with eyes that seemed much older. He was visibly nervous and kept glancing at Valerie as if waiting for some kind of signal from her. "Daddy!" Lily cried, running towards him. Daniel hugged her, but Ethan noticed he seemed more desperate than happy. "Lily, my daughter, where have you been? I looked for you everywhere." "That's a lie," Lily said, her voice small but firm. "You took me to the hospital and never came back. The lady at the hospital said you didn't want me anymore." The silence that followed was tense. Daniel looked nervously at Valerie, who maintained an impenetrable expression. Ethan began to realize there was something very wrong with this dynamic. "Perhaps we should discuss this in private," Valerie suggested. "Gerald, get back to work. Daniel, you too. This can be sorted out after hours." "No," Ethan said firmly. "This child spent 8 months on the streets. This will be sorted out now." It was then that the first major revelation came to light. Daniel, clearly under pressure, began to confess. "I didn't want to abandon her, but Miss Valerie said if I brought family problems to work, I'd be fired. I needed the job." "So you chose your job over your daughter?" Ethan asked, incredulous. "You don't understand," Daniel said, tears starting to roll down his face. "Zoe, her mother, she doesn't know where Lily is. I told her that social services had taken the girl, that there was nothing we could do." Ethan felt a rage build in his chest. "You lied to her mother? She thinks she lost her daughter forever?" "I was going to get her," Daniel protested. "I just needed more time, more money. Ms. Valerie promised me a promotion if I stayed focused on work." Valerie, who had remained silent during this confession, finally spoke. "Personal problems affect productivity. I cannot allow employees to bring their family dramas into my factory." "Your factory?" Ethan asked, his mind working quickly. "I thought you were just the manager." "Things change," Valerie replied evasively. It was at that moment that the second revelation hit Ethan like a lightning bolt. Watching Valerie more closely, he noticed a small ring on her finger, a ring he recognized immediately because he had given an identical one to his wife Miranda years ago. It was the Montgomery family ring, an heirloom passed down through generations. "Valerie Campos," he murmured, the surname finally making sense. "You're Valerie Montgomery Campos. You're Miranda's sister." Valerie's face paled, but she quickly recomposed her expression. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. You're my wife's younger sister, the same one who cut ties with the family over your father's inheritance." Lily looked confusedly from one adult to another, not understanding the tension that had filled the room. Daniel seemed even more nervous, as if he had realized he was caught up in something much bigger than he had imagined. "Even if that were true," Valerie said, regaining her composure, "it changes nothing. Daniel made his choice, the child was abandoned, and now you've found each other. End of story." "It's not the end of the story," Ethan retorted. "This child's mother still doesn't know she's alive. And you," he pointed at Daniel, "are going to take me to her right now." Daniel hesitated, looking at Valerie again. I don't know where she is exactly. She moved after I told her about social services." "Then we'll find her," Ethan said, scooping Lily into his arms. "And you," he looked directly at Valerie. "We still need to talk. I have some questions about how you acquired a factory and why you're destroying working-class families." Valerie smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Be careful with baseless accusations, Ethan. Some things are more complicated than they seem." As they left the factory, with Ethan carrying Lily and a reluctant Daniel following, He couldn't stop thinking about Valerie's last sentence. There was an implicit threat there, and he had a feeling he was just beginning to uncover the extent of the web of lies and manipulation surrounding this little family's life. The search for Zoe would be just the first step on a journey that would reveal secrets buried for years and force Ethan to confront not only the past of others, but also the choices he himself had made. The search for Zoe Taylor took 3 exhausting days. Daniel had provided only vague information about where she might be working, claiming he had lost all contact with her after lying about Lily's whereabouts. Ethan began to suspect there were more lies beyond those that had already been revealed. Finally, a janitor at the shopping center directed them to an office building where Zoe worked the night shift. Ethan, Lily, and a reluctant Daniel arrived there at 5 in the morning on a Thursday, finding a 32-year-old woman who looked as if she had aged a decade in the last few months. Zoe was mopping the floor of a hallway when she saw Lily. The bucket of water fell from her hands, splashing dirty water on the newly cleaned floor, but she didn't notice. Her eyes filled with tears as she ran towards her daughter. "Lily, my girl," she cried, hugging the child with a force that seemed to want to make up for all the months of separation. "Mommy, you disappeared," Lily said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "Daddy said you had gone away and wouldn't come back." Zoe looked up at Daniel, and Ethan saw a mixture of pain, anger, and confusion in her expression. "Daniel, what's happening? You said she was taken by social services, that we couldn't do anything." The confrontation that followed was intense. Daniel tried to explain, repeating the same excuses about pressure at work and fear of losing his job. But Zoe wasn't interested in his justifications. "You told me our daughter was taken away forever," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I cried myself to sleep every night. I changed jobs, moved, because I couldn't bear the memories. And all this time she was on the streets." "Zoe, I can explain everything," Daniel began, but she cut him off. "I don't want your explanations. I want you to get out of our lives, forever." It was then that Ethan noticed something strange. Zoe seemed weak, more fragile than someone her age should look. She coughed frequently, and there was a pallor to her skin that worried him. "Zoe, are you okay? You seem sick," he asked. She hesitated before answering. "It's just exhaustion. I work 2 jobs to pay the rent on the new apartment." But Lily, with the brutal honesty of children, said something that chilled everyone's blood. "Mommy always coughs up blood when she thinks I'm not looking." The silence that followed was deafening. Zoe tried to change the subject, saying it was just a persistent flu, but Ethan wasn't convinced. He had learned to recognize when someone was hiding serious health problems after spending 2 years avoiding doctors for fear of finding out he was sick too. "When was the last time you saw a doctor?" he insisted. "I don't have money for a doctor," Zoe admitted, "and I don't have time. I need to work to keep the apartment." Ethan made a decision right then. "We're going to the hospital. Now, I'll pay for all the tests." "I can't accept your help," Zoe protested. "I don't even really know who you are. He's my borrowed daddy," Lily explained with the simplicity only a child possesses. "He took care of me when you were gone." That explanation touched Zoe deeply, but it also brought a new worry. She looked at Ethan with suspicion. "Why would a stranger help my daughter? What do you want in return?" The question was fair, and Ethan struggled to find an answer that didn't sound like he was trying to replace his own lost family. "Because no child should go through what Lily went through, and because you deserve to know the truth about your health." After much insistence, Zoe agreed to go to the hospital. The tests revealed something that would change the course of everything. She had a severe form of chemical pneumonia caused by prolonged exposure to toxic substances. "How is that possible?" Ethan asked the doctor. "Where could she have been exposed to these chemicals?" We usually see this in workers from industries that don't follow proper safety protocols, explained Dr. Henry Santos, or in people who clean contaminated environments. Zoe was silent for a long moment before speaking. I used to work as a cleaner at the Northwood textile mill for almost 2 years. I always smelled a strange odor, but I thought it was normal. Ethan and Daniel exchanged glances. The same factory where Daniel worked, the same factory managed by Valerie. Did they provide protective equipment? The doctor asked. Valerie said it wasn't necessary for cleaning work, that the chemicals weren't dangerous in small amounts. Ethan's anger reached a new level. Valerie had not only manipulated Daniel into abandoning his daughter, but had also exposed Zoe to toxic substances, causing her illness. "How much time do I have?" Zoe asked, her voice barely a whisper. "With proper treatment, you can make a full recovery," the doctor said, "but it will be a long and expensive process. You'll need special medications and constant monitoring." "I don't have the money for that," Zoe said, tears streaming down her face. "I do," Ethan said without hesitation. "I can't accept it. I don't know you. I don't know why you're doing this." It was then that Ethan made a decision that had haunted him since he met Lily. He decided to tell the truth about his own story. "I lost my family 2 years ago, my wife and 3 children, a car accident on a rainy night." His voice trembled as he spoke. "Since then, I've just been going through the motions until I met Lily. She reminded me that there's still goodness in the world." Zoe watched him for a long moment. "Do you see your lost family in us?" "At first, maybe," Ethan admitted, "but now I see 2 people who deserve a chance to be happy, and if I can help with that, I will." Lily, who had been quiet during the conversation, approached Ethan and took his hand. "Can you be Mommy's borrowed daddy too?" The innocent question broke the tension of the moment, but also revealed the emotional complexity of the situation. Ethan was growing attached to this small family, and they to him. But there were so many problems to solve, so many secrets still to uncover. Daniel, who had remained silent during the hospital conversation, finally spoke up. "Ethan, there's something you need to know about Valerie and the factory. Something that might explain why she's so cruel." "What?" Ethan asked. "There are rumors among the employees. They say she didn't buy the factory legally, that there's something very wrong with the paperwork, and there are other sick workers too, not just Zoe." Indeed, this revelation opened a new line of investigation that Ethan knew he had to follow. Valerie had not only destroyed a family, but was potentially poisoning an entire community. As they left the hospital with Zoe's treatment plan in hand, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the complexity of the situation. He had found Lily, reunited her with her mother, but discovered that a much larger problem was at play. The connection between Valerie and his late wife Miranda still needed to be explored. And now, with evidence that she could be causing systematic environmental damage, Ethan knew he was facing something much more dangerous than a simple family feud. The question that haunted him was, how far had Valerie gone to get that factory, and how many other families had suffered in the process? Zoe's treatment began immediately, but it brought with it even more disturbing revelations. During the first week of medication, she began to recover memories that her illness had clouded. Memories of her last days at the factory, conversations she had overheard, documents she had seen during her nightly cleanings. "Ethan, I need to tell you something," she said one April afternoon while Lily played in the small apartment he had rented for them. "When I cleaned Valerie's office, I sometimes found strange papers, contracts with names crossed out, property transfer documents with altered dates." Ethan leaned forward, paying full attention. "What kind of alterations?" "The dates were always changed to make it look like she had bought the factory earlier than she actually did. And there were names of people who seemed to have been owners before her." "Do you remember any specific names?" Zoe hesitated. There was one that appeared a lot, Francisco Montgomery, and whenever I saw that name it was crossed out with a red pen. Ethan's blood ran cold. Francisco Montgomery was his father-in-law, Miranda's father, the man who had built a small industrial empire in Aspen Falls and the surrounding region, including stakes in several textile factories. Zoe, are you sure about that name? Absolutely. I saw it at least once a week in her documents. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Ethan called his personal lawyer, Ryan Scott. He needed to understand how Valerie had managed to acquire not just a factory, but specifically one that should have been part of Miranda's inheritance. Ryan, I need you to investigate the Northwood textile mill. I want the entire ownership history for the last 5 years. I can do that, but it will take a few days. Why the sudden interest? Ethan explained the situation. From meeting Lily to the discoveries about Valerie and the documents Zoe had seen. Ethan, if what you're suggesting is true, we're talking about large-scale document fraud. This is very serious. While waiting for the investigation's results, Ethan decided to approach the situation differently. He returned to the factory, this time alone, under the pretext of an inspection visit as a potential investor. Valerie received him with a coldness that contrasted with the agitation he could see in her eyes. What brings you here again, Ethan? I'm thinking of making some investments in the region. I heard you run this operation very well. I don't just run it, I am the legal owner, she replied, emphasizing each word. During the tour of the factory, Ethan noticed several irregularities. Workers without proper protective equipment, poor ventilation, and a strong chemical smell that explained why Zoe and probably others had gotten sick. Do you follow all environmental safety regulations? He asked. Of course. We have all the necessary permits, Valerie answered. But he noticed how she avoided looking directly at him. It was then that something happened that changed everything. Daniel approached them, clearly nervous, carrying a folder of documents. Ms. Valerie, the inspectors are arriving for the surprise visit, he said, not realizing Ethan was there. Valerie's face paled. What inspectors? The ones from the EPA. It seems someone filed a complaint. Ethan watched her reaction with interest. If she were complying with all the regulations, there would be no reason to panic. Daniel, can you give us a moment? Valerie said, her voice tense. After he left, she turned to Ethan. Did you file this complaint? Me? I didn't even know it was possible to file complaints, he lied. Don't treat me like an idiot, Ethan. Ever since you showed up, things have started to go wrong. Maybe things were already wrong, and I'm just helping to bring them to light. At that moment, the inspectors arrived. Ethan decided to stay and observe, pretending to be a potential investor interested in ensuring the company followed all regulations. What the inspectors found was shocking. Serious environmental violations, illegal dumping of chemical products, and falsified documentation regarding waste treatment. Valerie tried to explain, but it was clear she had been caught red-handed. Ms. Campos, this operation will be shut down immediately, said the lead inspector, and there will be a criminal investigation into these irregularities. When the inspectors left to make the shutdown official, Valerie turned to Ethan with an expression of pure fury. You've ruined everything, she hissed. I didn't do anything but ask questions, he replied calmly. You think I don't know who you are? You think I don't know why you're doing this? Please, enlighten me. Valerie laughed, but it wasn't a joyful sound. You want revenge for Miranda. You blame our family for her departure. Departure? Miranda didn't depart. She died in an accident. Accident? Valerie laughed again. What a convenient accident, wasn't it? Her words hit Ethan like a punch. What do you mean, convenient? Miranda found out some things about the family business she shouldn't have. Things about how our father really made his investments. And she was about to reveal everything. Ethan's world began to spin. Are you implying that... I'm not implying anything. I'm saying Miranda was too curious for her own good, and excessive curiosity can be dangerous. Before Ethan could respond, Daniel came running. Miss Valerie, the police have arrived too. They have a search warrant. The panic that swept over Valerie's face confirmed to Ethan that she was hiding much more than just environmental violations. There were bigger crimes involved, and for the first time he began to suspect that his family's tragedy might not have been an accident. Daniel, Ethan said quickly, you have a family to protect. If there's anything you know about irregularities here, now is the time to speak. Daniel looked nervously between Ethan and Valerie. I have some things saved. Documents she told me to destroy, but I kept them for my own safety. What kind of documents? Correspondence with a mechanic, a man named Oscar Delgado. They talked about cars, about how to do certain types of maintenance that leave no trace. Ethan felt his heart stop. Oscar Delgado was the mechanic who had checked the brakes on Miranda's car just days before the accident. The same mechanic who had said everything was in perfect condition. Daniel, where are these documents? At my house. I hid them because I was afraid one day she'd blame me for something and I'd need to protect myself. Valerie, realizing she was losing control of the situation, made one last desperate attempt. Ethan, you don't understand the situation. If you keep digging into this, you'll find out things about your own family you'd rather not know. Miranda wasn't the saint you think she was. But Ethan was no longer listening. His mind was processing all the implications of what he had just discovered. The accident that had destroyed his life could have been planned, and the woman responsible was standing right in front of him, having profited not only from the tragedy, but continuing to cause suffering to other families. As the police entered the factory and Valerie was taken in for questioning, Ethan knew his journey was just beginning. He needed the documents Daniel had saved. He needed to find Oscar Delgado, and most importantly, he needed to uncover the whole truth about what had happened to his family on that rainy night 2 years ago. The documents Daniel had saved revealed a web of corruption that went far beyond what Ethan had imagined. That same night, gathered in the apartment where Zoe and Lily were staying, the 3 adults examined piles of correspondence, altered contracts, and suspicious receipts that painted a grim picture of the past few years. Here, Daniel said, pointing to a text exchange between Valerie and Oscar Delgado, they talk about solving the problem with the blue car. Wasn't your wife's car blue? Ethan nodded, a knot forming in his stomach, a metallic blue Civic. Miranda loved that car. Zoe, who was feeling better with her treatment, looked at other documents. Ethan, look at this. These are bank transfers made to Oscar the day after the accident. Large amounts, much higher than any normal mechanic service. As they examined more papers, a pattern began to emerge. Valerie had not only fraudulently acquired the factory, she had systematically eliminated anyone who might question her actions. And Miranda, apparently, had discovered something that made her a target. I need to find Oscar Delgado, Ethan said, determination growing in his voice. I know where he lives, Daniel offered. But Ethan, the man is different. Since the accident, he drinks a lot, has nightmares. The neighbors say he talks to himself, always apologizing to someone. The next morning, Ethan left Lily playing with Zoe and went with Daniel to Oscar's house. It was a simple building in a working-class neighborhood with an unkempt yard and windows that were always closed. Oscar Delgado answered the door after several insistent knocks. The 50-year-old man looked like he had aged 2 decades. Thin, with sunken eyes and hands that trembled constantly, he recognized Ethan immediately. I knew you would come, Oscar said, his voice hoarse. I knew one day I'd have to pay for what I did. So, You admit you sabotaged the car? Oscar motioned for them to enter. The house smelled of alcohol and neglect. Empty bottles were scattered around the living room, and the walls were covered with newspaper clippings about the accident. Every day I read about the accident, Oscar said, sitting heavily in an old armchair. Every day I see the pictures of your family, your wife, your children. They were innocent. Why did you do it? Ethan asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. Valerie had my son, Oscar replied, tears starting to stream down his face. My Edward worked at the factory. When he found out she was forging environmental documents, he wanted to report her. Valerie fired him, and then she arranged for him to be accused of theft. She planted evidence. Daniel leaned forward. Edward was arrested? For 2 years. In a prison where Valerie had contacts, she made sure my boy suffered in there, and she told me the only way to protect him was to do what she said. And what did she tell you to do? Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. Sabotage the brakes on your wife's car. Make it look like an accident caused by the rain and the slippery road. Oscar sobbed. I never imagined there would be children in the car. Valerie said it would just be Miranda and that it would be quick. The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. His family had been murdered to protect Valerie's crimes. 3 innocent children had lost their lives for greed and a thirst for power. Where is your son now? Daniel asked. He got out of prison 6 months ago, but he can't find work anywhere. Valerie spread rumors about him all over the region. He's not doing well psychologically. Ethan stood up and started pacing the room, trying to process everything. Oscar, do you have evidence of what she did? Anything beyond your word? I have the messages she sent me, and I have the parts I removed from the car. I saved everything, hoping one day I could use it to protect my son. Where are these things? Oscar led them to a small shed in the backyard. There, arranged like a macabre shrine, were the sabotaged brake parts from Miranda's car, along with old cell phones, printouts of messages, and even photographs documenting the sabotage process. Why did you keep all this? Ethan asked, horrified, yet fascinated by the meticulous organization. Guilt, Oscar replied simply, and fear. I knew that if Valerie ever decided to get rid of me, I'd need something against her. Daniel examined the evidence. This is enough to convict her of murder. But how do we do it without compromising Edward? Oscar asked. He can still be used against me. It was then that Ethan had an idea. Where is Edward now? In a boarding house downtown. He drinks as much as I do, trying to forget what our family went through because of that woman. I want to talk to him. If we can coordinate our actions, we can protect you both and make sure Valerie pays for what she did. At the boarding house, Edward Delgado was a younger version of his father's despair. At 28, he seemed like a broken man, but when Ethan explained who he was and what he had discovered, something ignited in his eyes. Mr. Montgomery, I am so sorry for what happened to your family. When I found out what my father was forced to do, I almost killed myself with guilt. Edward, can you help me understand how Valerie gained so much power? How did she manage to control so many people? Edward explained that Valerie had built a network of blackmail and corruption over years. She collected compromising information on employees, local business owners, and even officials, using it to force their cooperation. She has files on almost everyone important in the region, Edward said. She keeps it all in a secret room in her office. That's how she managed to buy the factory for a fraction of its real value. She blackmailed the previous owner. And why did she choose that specific factory? Because it belonged to your wife's family. Valerie was always jealous of Miranda. She said Miranda had stolen their father's attention and love. When she found out Miranda was investigating the family's finances, she saw an opportunity. for revenge. This revelation added a personal layer to the tragedy that Ethan hadn't considered. Valerie hadn't just killed for greed, she had killed out of jealousy and family resentment. "Is there a way to access those files of hers?" Ethan asked. "Now that the factory is shut down, maybe, but it would be dangerous. Valerie still has contacts in the local police." It was at that moment that Daniel made a suggestion that would change everything. "What if we don't try to access the files secretly? What if we force a situation where she reveals everything herself?" "How?" "Valerie is desperate now. The factory is shut down, she's under investigation, and she knows you're close to the truth. Desperate people make mistakes." Ethan considered the proposal. "Are you suggesting we provoke her?" "I'm suggesting we create a situation where she has no choice but to show her hand, and I know exactly how to do it." The plan Daniel presented was risky, but brilliant. They would use the knowledge they had about Valerie's corruption network to force her into a confession, creating a situation where she thought she was controlling the narrative, but was actually trapping herself. As they headed home, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about how a 4-year-old girl offering her last piece of bread had triggered a chain of events that was finally bringing justice for his family. Lily wasn't just the key to reuniting a shattered family, she had been the catalyst for exposing years of crime and corruption. The question now was whether they would have enough courage to execute a plan that could finally bring Valerie to justice, or if she would discover their intentions and strike first. Daniel's plan was simple in its complexity. Pretend that Edward had decided to collaborate with Valerie again, offering information about the evidence his father had saved. The idea was to make Valerie believe she could control the situation, leading her to reveal details about other crimes to protect herself. 3 days after the meeting at the boarding house, Edward showed up at the police station, where Valerie was giving a statement about the factory's environmental irregularities. He asked to speak with her privately, claiming he had information that could help her. Ethan and Daniel waited in a nearby cafe, both equipped with recording devices that Edward was wearing. It was a huge risk, but it was the only way to get a confession that didn't just rely on the word of people who could be seen as accomplices. "Valerie," Edward said when they were finally alone in a visiting room, "I know you're in trouble because of the environmental investigations. I can help." Valerie watched him suspiciously. "Why would you help me after everything that's happened?" "Because I need to work. And because I know you have the power to solve my problems, just like you always have." Valerie's vanity spoke louder than her caution. "That's true. I've always been able to solve problems, but this time is different. Ethan Montgomery is asking questions he shouldn't be asking." "What kind of questions?" "About his family, about the accident." Valerie paused, studying Edward's face. "You know what your father did, don't you?" Edward feigned hesitation. "I know he messed with Ethan's car, but I never understood why." "Because Miranda was investigating our father's inheritance. She had discovered I was entitled to a larger share of the family assets, and more importantly, she had discovered the questionable investments our father was making." "What investments?" Valerie leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Francisco Montgomery didn't build his fortune with just honest business. He had partnerships with companies that broke environmental laws, exploited undocumented workers, and paid bribes to get public contracts." Edward feigned surprise. "And Miranda was going to expose this?" "She was a stupid idealist. She thought she could clear the family name by revealing everything and returning dirty money. She didn't understand it would destroy not only our fortune, but dozens of other families involved in our father's business. So you stopped her." "I protected our family and our community," Valerie said, her voice filled with self-justification. "Miranda was going to destroy the livelihood of hundreds of people just to satisfy her clean conscience." Edward kept pressing. But why use my father? Why not handle it another way? Because your family needed to learn about consequences. Edward, you tried to challenge me when you found out things at the factory. Your father needed to understand that challenging my authority has a price. The confession was being recorded, but Edward knew he needed more specific details to ensure the evidence was irrefutable. Valerie, Ethan is close to finding out everything. He has my father, he has Daniel talking. What are we going to do? Valerie stood up and started pacing the small room. I've already thought about that. Ethan is emotionally vulnerable because of the girl and her mother. We can use that against him. How? Zoe is sick because of the chemical exposure from the factory. If she suddenly gets worse, if something happens to her, Ethan will be so devastated he won't be able to continue investigating. Edward's blood ran cold. Are you talking about hurting her? I'm talking about accelerating a process that's already in motion. Zoe was already sick. If the medication she's taking is modified, it will just be a natural worsening of her condition. You have access to her medication. Valerie smiled, and it was a smile Edward would never forget. I have contacts everywhere, Edward. Pharmacies, hospitals, even in the company that supplies the special drugs she needs. At that moment, Edward fully understood the extent of Valerie's evil. She had not only murdered Ethan's family for personal revenge, but was willing to kill again to protect her secrets. And what if that doesn't work? What if Ethan keeps investigating even with Zoe? Compromised. Then we'll have to deal with him directly. Accidents happen, Edward, especially to people who ask too many questions. Edward knew he had enough evidence, but Valerie kept talking, revealing details about other crimes, other families she had destroyed to maintain her power. You think Ethan's family was my first victim? In the last 5 years, at least 7 people who threaten my business have had convenient accidents. A fire here, a hit and run there, an accidental overdose over there. 7 people, including the former owner of the factory. Joaquin Santos thought he could blackmail me after he found out how I had acquired the property deeds. He had a very timely heart attack. Edward struggled to keep his expression neutral. Was Joaquin Santos related to Daniel? His cousin. That's why I knew Daniel would be easily controlled. He had seen what happened to Joaquin when he tried to defy me. The final connection was made. Daniel hadn't just been manipulated by fear of losing his job. He had been terrorized by what happened to his own cousin when he tried to resist Valerie. Edward, you need to help me now, Valerie continued. I need to know exactly what evidence your father has saved, and I need to get my hands on it before Ethan finds it. He kept everything in a shed behind the house, parts from the car, messages, even photos of what he did. Photos? Valerie seemed genuinely worried for the first time. He documented the whole process. Said it was to protect himself in case you tried to blame him. Valerie was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Where are these photos now? With my father, but he's willing to hand them over to you as long as you guarantee I stay out of any trouble. Of course, Valerie lied. I've always protected you, haven't I? Edward knew it was a lie. Valerie was planning to eliminate both him and his father as soon as she had the evidence. But now he had the full confession on tape, including admissions to multiple murders and plans to kill Zoe and possibly Ethan. When can we meet with your father? Valerie asked. Tonight, in a neutral location. How about the municipal cemetery? It's isolated, no cameras and symbolic. Valerie agreed, not realizing the irony of the location choice. She was so focused on retrieving the evidence that could incriminate her that she didn't consider she might be walking into a trap. When Edward left the police station, he went directly to the cafe where Ethan and Daniel were waiting. The recording he carried contained enough confessions to convict Valerie of multiple murders, conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. We got everything, he said, showing them the recording device. She confessed not only about your family, but about at least 7 other victims. Ethan listened to the recording in silence, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When he got to the part where Valerie planned to poison Zoe, he stood up abruptly. We need to protect Zoe and Lily immediately, and we need to make sure the police have this evidence before the meeting tonight. Daniel nodded. I'll call the detective in charge of the case, but Ethan, you realize Valerie will know she's been set up when the police show up with the recording? Yes, and she'll try to run or attack. That's why we need to be prepared. The meeting at the cemetery would be the culmination of everything they had discovered. But first, they had to ensure Zoe and Lily were safe and that the authorities were fully aware of how dangerous Valerie was. What none of them expected was that Valerie had already realized something was wrong, and she was preparing her own trap for that night. Valerie's suspicion had started when she noticed small, strange details in Edward's behavior during his visit. The way he asked very specific questions, how he seemed to be steering the conversation toward topics she would normally avoid, and especially how he had suggested the meeting place so quickly as if he had already thought of it. After Edward left the station, Valerie made a few calls to her contacts in the area. What she found confirmed her suspicions. Ethan had been seen going in and out of Oscar Delgado's house, then visiting Edward at the boarding house. The pieces fell into a picture she didn't like. Meanwhile, Ethan, Daniel, and Edward were coordinating with the lead detective, Marcus Oliveira, a man of integrity who was shocked by the content of the recording. Mr. Montgomery, this recording is enough evidence to arrest Valerie Campos for multiple murders, the detective said, but we need to do this carefully. If she suspects we've been alerted, she might try to flee or, worse, attack the witnesses. That's why we suggested keeping the meeting, Edward explained. She'll show up expecting to retrieve the evidence, and you can arrest her red-handed. And what if she brings backup? You said she has contacts in many places. Daniel spoke up. I know some of the thugs she uses, men who work at the factory and do extra jobs for her. I can identify them if they show up. The plan was refined. The police would position themselves discreetly around the cemetery, while Oscar and Edward would go to the meeting as planned. Ethan would be in a position where he could observe, but out of direct danger. But Valerie had made her own plans. She called 2 of her trusted men, Raymond and Jack, factory workers who had done other favors for her in the past. I need you to come with me to a meeting tonight, she said. There might be trouble. What kind of trouble, Miss Valerie? Raymond asked. The kind that needs to be taken care of permanently. Meanwhile, Zoe noticed that Lily was especially restless that afternoon. The girl, who had developed a 6th sense for detecting tension in the adults around her, realized something important was happening. Mommy, is Daddy Ethan going to be okay? She asked, using the affectionate nickname she had created for Ethan. Why do you ask, my love? Because he looked sad and worried, like he used to when I lived on the street and saw him helping people, but always with sad eyes. Zoe hugged her daughter, impressed by the child's perception. Sometimes grown-ups have to solve difficult problems, sweetie, but Daddy Ethan is strong. And is the bad lady going to stop being mean? The question caught Zoe by surprise. What bad lady? The lady from the factory. I remember her. She was mean to everyone, especially Daddy Daniel. Zoe realized Lily had retained much more information about the events around her than anyone had realized. Honey, what else do you remember about that lady? She used to talk on the phone about hurting people. One time I was hiding and I heard her talking about making someone sick on purpose. Zoe's blood ran cold. If Lily had overheard conversations about poisoning people, she could be in danger. She immediately called Ethan. Ethan, I need to talk to you. Lily overheard things that might be important. What kind of things? About Valerie planning to poison someone. Ethan, I think she was talking about me. Ethan panicked. He had assumed Valerie's plans against Zoe were recent, but if Lily had heard these conversations before, it meant Valerie had been planning this for much longer. "Zoe, you and Lily need to get out of there now. Go to the police station and stay with Detective Marcus. Explain the situation. And you? I'll be safe, but you two need to be protected." At 8 o'clock that evening, all the participants began to take their positions at the Aspen Falls Municipal Cemetery. It was an old place, with century-old tombstones and leafy trees that cast deep shadows, even with the limited public lighting. Oscar and Edward arrived first, both visibly nervous but determined. They carried a folder with some of the real evidence mixed with fake documents, as bait for Valerie. Ethan positioned himself behind a large mausoleum where he could see the meeting point but remain hidden. The police were spread out strategically but discreetly enough not to alert Valerie. Valerie arrived promptly at 9, but not alone. Raymond and Jack accompanied her, and all three looked tense and ready for trouble. "Oscar," she greeted him coldly, "did you bring what you promised?" Oscar showed her the folder. "It's all here. But first, I want guarantees about my son." "What guarantees?" "I want your word that Edward will be left alone after this, that there will be no retaliation." Valerie smiled, but it was a cruel smile. "Oscar, do you really think I'm going to leave living witnesses after everything you know?" The mask had completely fallen away. Edward took a step back, realizing they were in real danger. "Miss Valerie, we were always loyal to you." "Loyal?" she laughed. "You recorded our conversation today. Do you think I'm stupid?" Edward's heart pounded. How had she found out? "Raymond, Jack," she called to her thugs. "Take care of them." It was at that moment the police decided to intervene. Detective Marcus and 2 officers emerged from their positions, shouting for everyone to surrender. But Valerie was prepared for this too. She pulled a gun she had hidden in her coat. "I knew you'd try to set me up," she yelled. "But I'm not going to be arrested for protecting my family and my business." The confrontation that followed was tense. Valerie kept the gun pointed alternately at Oscar, Edward, and the police, while Raymond and Jack seemed confused about what to do. "Valerie, drop the weapon," Detective Marcus ordered. "You're only making your situation worse." "My situation?" she screamed, her voice echoing among the graves. "You've destroyed my life, destroyed my business. You destroyed your own life when you decided to kill innocent people," Ethan replied, stepping out from his hiding place against the established protocol. Valerie turned the gun on him. Ethan Montgomery, the man who can't accept that his perfect wife wasn't so perfect after all. "Miranda was innocent, so were my children." "Innocent?" Valerie laughed hysterically. "She was trying to destroy our family, trying to expose businesses that supported dozens of working-class families. She was trying to do the right thing. The right thing for whom? For your clean conscience? While hundreds of people would lose their jobs." During this argument, Edward saw an opportunity. While Valerie was focused on Ethan, he moved silently toward her, but Valerie noticed the movement and turned the gun on him. "Don't even think about it, Edward." It was then that something unexpected happened. Raymond, one of Valerie's thugs, spoke for the first time. "Miss Valerie, you said this was just to scare them. You didn't say anything about killing anyone." "Things changed, Raymond. I didn't sign up for this, neither did Jack." The thug's loyalty was wavering, and Valerie realized she was losing control. "You're all weak," she hissed. "You don't understand what it takes to maintain power." It was in that moment of distraction that Detective Marcus managed to get close enough to disarm Valerie. She fought back, but was quickly subdued and arrested. As she was being led away, she screamed one last threat that chilled everyone present. "You think this is over? I have contacts in places you can't even imagine. This won't end here." Later at the station, while giving their statements, Ethan discovered the full extent of the criminal network Valerie had built. She truly did have contacts in various public agencies, and some of them might try to protect her or interfere with the legal process. The fight for justice was far from over, but at least now they had the necessary evidence and the recorded confession. The question that remained was whether it would be enough to ensure Valerie paid for all her crimes, or if her influence would still be strong enough to save her. 6 months after Valerie's arrest, Aspen Falls was in a period of rebuilding and ongoing revelations. The investigation had expanded far beyond what anyone had initially imagined, uncovering a web of corruption that affected not only the region, but had connections to other cities and states. Ethan was in his office on a sunny October morning when he received a call that would change everything once again. It was from Detective Marcus, with news he didn't expect. "Ethan, I need you to come to the station. We have a revelation about Lily that's going to surprise you." "What kind of revelation?" "It's better to explain in person, and bring Zoe and the girl." An hour later, they were gathered at the station, where Marcus had prepared a detailed presentation on recent findings. "During Valerie's interrogations and the analysis of her secret files, we discovered something extraordinary about Lily," he began. "You know she shows an exceptional memory for details, right?" Zoe nodded. "She always remembered things that even we adults forgot. Conversations, places, people. Well, we've discovered that Lily has a condition called eidetic memory, a rare form of photographic memory. And over the past few months, working with specialized psychologists, we've been able to access memories from her that are crucial for closing several cases." The detective showed detailed notes that had been made based on Lily's recollections. She observed and memorized Valerie's phone conversations, secret meetings, even document numbers and license plates of cars involved in criminal activities. Ethan was stunned. "Are you saying that Lily, as young as she is a key witness?" "More than that. Her memories helped us identify other criminals in Valerie's network, including corrupt public officials and business owners who participated in the schemes." Zoe pulled her daughter onto her lap, looking at her with a mix of pride and concern. "Does this mean she's still in danger?" "Actually, no. With all the arrests we've made based on her information, the network has been completely dismantled. Valerie will face multiple murder charges, and there's no one left in a position to threaten you." But there was more news. Marcus continued. "There's something else we discovered, about Miranda's inheritance and the legitimacy of Valerie's actions." Ethan leaned forward, paying full attention. "Valerie was indeed entitled to a part of the family inheritance, but she forged documents to claim a much larger portion than was her due. Francisco Montgomery, Miranda's father, had left specific instructions on how the fortune should be distributed." "What instructions?" "A significant portion was to be allocated to an assistance fund for working-class families in the region. Valerie concealed this part of the will and used the money to finance her criminal activities." The revelation meant that Ethan, as Miranda's widower, had the legal right to administer this assistance fund. It was a substantial amount that could benefit hundreds of families in the region. "But there's a specific condition in the will," Marcus continued. "The fund can only be administered by someone who demonstrates a genuine commitment to the community's well-being, and it needs the approval of a board composed of representatives from the beneficiary families." 3 weeks later, Ethan found himself at a community assembly where working-class families from Aspen Falls and the surrounding area had gathered to decide on the assistance fund. Among those present were many people who had been harmed by Valerie's network, including workers who had lost jobs, families who had suffered from environmental pollution, and relatives of her victims. "Mr. Montgomery," said Ms. Maria, a 60-year-old woman representing a group of seamstresses, "how can we be sure this fund will actually help our families and not become another scheme to benefit the rich?" It was a fair question, and Ethan had prepared for it. "Ms. Maria, I propose that the fund be managed with complete transparency, with public monthly accountability, and decisions made jointly with representatives elected by you." "And will you gain anything from this?" asked Sebastian, a former employee of the textile mill. "Nothing financially. In fact, I intend to contribute my own resources to grow the fund." Daniel, who had become a sort of spokesperson for the workers, stood up. "Folks, I worked for all these people. I saw how Miss Valerie treated us, and I saw how Mr. Montgomery treated my family when he found out about our problems. He's not like her." The discussion continued for hours, but gradually a consensus began to emerge. The community decided to approve Ethan as the fund's administrator, but with specific conditions that would ensure the beneficiaries had an active voice in the decisions. A year after meeting Lily in the rain, Ethan found himself in a situation he could never have imagined. He had become the administrator of a fund that helped dozens of families. He had uncovered and exposed a criminal network, and most importantly, he had found a new family. The relationship between him, Zoe, and Lily had evolved naturally during the months of turmoil. It wasn't a replacement for his lost family, but something new and genuine that grew out of extraordinary circumstances. "Daddy Ethan," Lily said one Sunday afternoon as they played in the park, "do you still get sad thinking about your other family?" The question, asked with the brutal honesty of a child, touched Ethan's heart. "Sometimes, yes, but now I also feel happy thinking about our family now." Zoe, who had fully recovered from her illness thanks to proper treatment, smiled. "Ethan, you saved our family, but I think we saved you too." It was true. Ethan had found a purpose that went beyond his personal pain. The Assistance Fund was helping families get education, healthcare, and opportunities for decent work. The textile mill had been restructured with strict environmental standards and proper working conditions. Oscar and Edward Delgado had also found redemption. Oscar quit drinking and started working as a mechanic for the Assistance Fund, helping low-income families maintain their vehicles. Edward got a job in the new factory administration, where his experience and honesty were valued. Daniel had been promoted to supervisor, not out of favoritism, but on merit and the trust he had built during the events that exposed Valerie. He and Zoe had talked for long hours about the past, reaching a mutual understanding, but Zoe made it clear that her future was with Ethan. In a simple ceremony held at the local church in Aspen Falls, Ethan and Zoe were married. Lily was the flower girl, carrying flowers she had chosen herself, always birds of paradise, representing the freedom they had all won. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," said the priest. And as Ethan kissed Zoe, Lily clapped enthusiastically. After the ceremony, as the small reception took place in the church hall, Ethan reflected on how a 4-year-old girl offering her last piece of bread had triggered a series of events that transformed not only their lives, but an entire community. Valerie was sentenced to 60 years in prison for multiple murders, fraud, corruption, and environmental crimes. Her network of contacts was also dismantled, resulting in dozens of other arrests and the cleanup of several public institutions in the region. 3 years after their first meeting, Ethan, Zoe, and Lily, now 7 and thriving in school, visited the grave of Miranda and the children. Lily placed flowers she had picked from their home garden. "Hi, Daddy Ethan's old family," she said naturally. "Thank you for taking care of him until we got here." Zoe squeezed Ethan's hand, and he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the forgetting of his pain, but its integration into a life that had found new meaning. "Miranda," he whispered, "I found my way back to the light, and I think you'd be proud of how it happened." A gentle breeze moved the flowers on the grave, and Ethan chose to interpret it as approval. They walked hand in hand back to the car, where a new life awaited them, a life built not on forgetting the past, but on transforming pain into purpose, loss into shared gain, and revenge into true justice. The story that had begun with a hungry child offering her last piece of bread had become the story of how love can blossom in the most unlikely places, and how a child's innocence can be the catalyst for exposing the truth and bringing redemption to lost souls. Lily, now safe between two parents who loved her deeply, continued to use her extraordinary memory, no longer to witness crimes, but to capture moments of happiness that she knew she would want to remember forever. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story by giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you so much.